Y'all ready for my longest video ever? Let's do it. Hey everyone, Mark here. Welcome to BTD. Today we're talking about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And I want to talk a little bit first about what this video is and what it's not, because it's not going to be a traditional review like a lot of the other videos on Dragon Heist that are out there. So if all you're looking for is a quick review of the game to figure out whether or not you want to purchase it or run it or whatever, there are other videos that do that really well, and I don't want to rehash that same exact territory. This will include elements of a review, but I want it to be more than that, so I've broken this video into several different parts. So the first part is actually going to be a review, and it's going to be my thoughts on Dragon Heist as a whole, and we'll jump through the different chapters, we'll talk about the different sections, what I think works, what I think doesn't work a little bit, and how I think of it overall. In the second part, we're going to talk very much in detail about actually running the game. So this is going to be a section for the DMs, and I'm going to talk about how I would run the game because I am probably going to be running this game. So as I'm recording this video, I'm actively prepping to run Dragon Heist at a table with one of the two groups that I play with. It is very likely that at some point I'm going to be running this game. And so I'm actively prepping and figuring out how I want to tweak it to make this adventure my own. So with some of the issues that we talk about in the first part with the review, some of the things that I think aren't ideal, we're going to talk about how I would mitigate that or change things so that it isn't as much of a problem and it flows better at the table. In part 3 of this video, we're going to talk about Waterdeep, the city itself, and bringing it to life. Now, I've set entire sessions and entire arcs of campaigns in Waterdeep, so I have a little bit of experience with this, and I really love the setting, and I love all the possibilities of the city of Waterdeep. And I think the book is a good primer for the city and gives you a lot to work with, but we're going to talk a little bit about how you make it feel alive and make it feel like its own character within the game so that the city is more than just the location, but it actively feels like it's working with or against your players depending on what section you're in. In the final part of this video, part 4, I want to talk about all the different supplements that exist for this adventure in particular. Any adventure that comes out now from Wizards or other major third parties is going to have a lot of supplemental things that come out from the community's creators. Most of these are going to end up on the DM's Guild. Some might end up on DriveThruRPG or other third-party sites. And there's so much that's available, and I thought originally that in this video I was going to download and purchase a bunch of those from DM's Guild and then go through a bunch of them to say what I thought about them, whether I liked them, whether I didn't like them, but there's just too many to do that. But I do think that there's some takeaways from the different things that are out there, different ways that you can enhance the game and pull in other materials that have been created by the community. And while I think that adventures should be able to stand on their own, we're going to talk about some considerations, some things that I consider of whether or not I want to pull other materials into my game that aren't in the official adventure and why that is, and some other cases where I don't want to do that and why that is. So this is going to be a long, meandering video, I'm anticipating, and probably quite long. But if you're going to be playing through Waterdeep, I would recommend it. Or actually, scratch that. If you're going to be DMing Waterdeep Dragon Heist, I would recommend this video. If you're playing, I would not, because there is going to be massive amounts of spoilers in this. And so if you're in my groups, please don't watch this because I'm going to be talking specifically about how I would run the game. So I don't want to spoil anything there. And if you're a player in general and you think you're going to be playing this, please stop here because I'm not going to be able to avoid spoilers. So just from a technical perspective, when I bought the book and received it, I started paging through and I noticed a lot of the text seemed off. And it seems off in the sense that there is something, they printed the text and then they printed it again, and that second printing of the text over the first is just like a couple millimeters off. But it has this weird effect where when you're looking at it from a distance, it feels like you're drunk, and I don't like it, and I definitely don't think that was intended, and I know I'm not the only one who has experienced this in the printing, so whoever the print house is, get your stuff together. I'm sure this will be corrected on subsequent printings, and frankly, it doesn't affect the game. I was able to read everything fine, but it was a little bit annoying. So the book starts out with a pronunciation guide, and I both like and don't like this. I like it because there's going to be a lot of names that you don't know how to pronounce and are very weird because this is D&D, and it tells you, okay, here's exactly how you pronounce it. Okay, great. So everybody knows the pronunciations at the table. I think it I think that misses something though, because part of the fun of D&D with these weird names that have existed since way back in first edition. So I remember reading through my older brother's copies of the first edition manuals and monster manuals and god manuals, and really enjoying all the names but having no idea how to pronounce 75% of them in some cases. And that was a lot of fun, and I would make up my own pronunciations, and a lot of them were wrong. And I've heard of so many different like debates and arguments and discussions, all in good fun, of how do you pronounce this thing in D&D. And the more they codify that and say this is exactly how you pronounce these things, the less you're going to have that sort of silly arbitrary fun at the table trying to figure out exactly how to pronounce things. But, you know, we're in the future and this is progress, so nice, good pronunciation guide. You're not going to have to worry about pronouncing anything. Yes, those things. And the introduction does a good job of setting up the adventure, letting you know what's coming up, and it has at certain parts across the adventure the flow charts to show you how it is structured. And I really like these. I think this really helps to structure it in your mind to see, okay, this is exactly how it's going to fit together, and it's going to go from A to B to C, or A to B to one of these three things, back to this, then to these things, however it works. And this can really help, especially in some of the later chapters where there's a lot of different locations and the order might be a little bit confusing unless you had something like a flowchart. And if you're unfamiliar with Dragon Heist, or don't know the central plot, 500,000 gold pieces, or dragons as they're known in Waterdeep, have been hidden somewhere in the city by the former Open Lord, who himself doesn't remember because his memory was wiped of where these are. So the memory of where all this gold is trapped in the Stone of Galore, which is a MacGuffin that the players are going to have to try to track down and take from one of the villains or one of their lackeys or minions. So the whole adventure involves learning about this, tracking down and finding the Stone of Galore, taking it to where this money is being held, is being secretively stored, and then finding a way to either make it their own or distribute it to their allies as they see fit. There's a lot of different ways it could end, but that is the central plot. Dragon Heist also gives you the option to choose one of 4 different villains, and we're going to talk more about the choice of your villain. And essentially, though, you're going to pick one, and while the others can be in the background, you can include them in certain elements in the game. They're not going to be the major villain whose base or lair you end up at, and they're not going to be the one who's actively trying to track down the Stone of Galore and get the dragon horde. And while I see where they were going with the choice of villain, they said, oh, we have these 4 villains that we think are interesting. Why don't we just let the players decide? Don't give it more replayability. Well, sort of. I don't really like how it's implemented. I see where they're going with it, and I think a lot of the villains are interesting, and some of the plot hooks into the villain's layers are really cool, but in practice, how many groups are going to run this more than once? And the answer is, I don't know, but probably not the majority. And the other thing is, if you run it more than once, yes, you have a different villain, but frankly, the first 4 chapters of the game, which is most of it, of the book, first 4 chapters, so there's really only 5, let me check, there's 8 chapters of play, but chapters 5 through 8, so the last 4 are the different layers. So really, in any given game, you're probably only going to be pulling one of those 4 chapters. So the first 4 chapters aren't going to change too much. There is some variation in chapter 4, but it's going to feel very much the same. So you're not really going to be able to play through this more than once. It's going to have to be with a brand new group. So I think that this ends up being something where you're just not going to see a lot of the content in the book from your game. And that's a little unfortunate because I actually really like the layers, but I think that at best, you will see why, and we'll talk more about this later, about how maybe you could change that in your campaign, but there's actually a possibility that the players won't see any of the villain layers, and most are only going to see one. So I think there are some ways to massage this that make it a little bit less onerous, but as an initial decision, and definitely for DMs who are running it as written, I think that it's a little short-sighted because it's not going to be something that too many groups play through more than once, just because there is a ton of overlap in the early chat for 80% of the campaign. That said, the villains are very interesting. I don't think there's a bad choice in the bunch. There are ones that I like better than others, and we'll talk about that when we talk in part 2. But there are a lot of cool elements to these villains, so I think that is is a great part of the book, and how you can incorporate these villains into the setting. And chapter 1 is the introductory chapter, and I probably have the least to say about this of the many chapters in the book, because I think it's a solid introductory adventure. It gets you into the politics that are going on in Waterdeep at the time of the adventure. It gives you a little bit of the backdrop, and it's a nice solid intro adventure that gives you a couple of dungeon areas or a warehouse and then a literal dungeon in the sewers to explore and fight your way through. And I think it does a decent job of all of this. We'll talk a little bit more about how I would bring it more to life, and how I would insert some elements of exposition into chapter 1 that they space out over the course of the book. I would front load a lot more of it, but I think it does a pretty good job of introducing you to the city and getting you off on the right foot. And then of course by the end of chapter 1 you have yourself a deed to a manor in Trollskull Alley. Chapter 2 in Trollskull Alley might seem like it has the least to do with the master plot that's going on, and I think probably if you were writing a summary of Dragon Heist, the shortest section would be on chapter 2 here in Trollskull Alley, because most of what they're doing is sort of nesting in their new manor that they acquired in chapter 1. And you are building it out. You can open a tavern, you can figure out who your neighbors are and the shops. You might develop some allies or enemies within them, within those neighbors. And there are a lot of different factions that, because you did this heroic deed in chapter 1 for a relatively well-known person, are going to come knocking at your door in one way or another. They might not literally be knocking at your door, but they're going to be getting the attention of the players and trying to get them into their groups, trying to curry favor with them and see if they might be interested in joining various factions and doing certain services and tasks and quests for them. Much of this is not related at all to the Dragon Heist, and that seems a little bit odd, and it's probably going to seem odd with my next statement as well, because I think this is the most important chapter in the book. Chapters 3 and 4, frankly, could go by rather quickly, and then chapters 5 through 8, whichever one of the layers you end up in, is going to be an interesting sort of heist / dungeon crawl if you are in there, but also won't end up being terribly lengthy. Chapter 2 is where you can actually luxuriate a little bit without some driving narrative force in front of you, and really dig into the setting of Waterdeep and allow the players to figure out the party dynamics, figure out their place in the city, figure out what they want to do with their manor, and start to interact in meaningful ways with big NPCs, with important NPCs from around the city, including many of the factions that they have available to them. So there are a lot of side quests for the factions, and I both dislike and like how they handle this. So there'll be a faction quest chain. So maybe if there is a drow in the group, the drow of Bregendaerth might reach out to that character, and by extension the rest of the party, and say, hey, if you join us, you can gain some influence and power within the city, and there will be rewards. Would you like to do these quests for us? And the players might say yes. And at that point, there is a miniature quest chain. These quest chains are very small. It might only be a sentence or two for each level of the party. So when the party's level 2, here's the quest for Bregendaerth. When they're level 3, here's the quest. And again, it's only a sentence or two, and so it's up to you, the DM, to say, do I want to do this with just a couple quick dice rolls and sort of hand wave over it, or do I want to build these out into entire sessions worth of play where they're going throughout the city and interacting with it? But if you do that, you're going to have to create a lot from these basic descriptions that they give you. This is both good and bad, because there are going to be DMs who are a little intimidated by this and who are doing other work to make sure that Dragon Heist runs well. And the idea of having to insert entire quest chains where there's only a few sentences to go off of might be a lot for them to have to handle. Others will enjoy the improvisational elements, so your mileage may vary with this. But I do like all the options available to the players with their manor. It's really going to end up seeming like home if you spend any amount of time getting them to interact with their surroundings and their neighborhood and the different NPCs that will eventually come into contact with them. And the quest chains themselves, I think, run the gamut from really good to really kind of bland and everything in between. I think a lot of them are very good, and you may have to mix and match a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about that in part 2 of this video, but I think that most of them you'll find something to latch onto that's interesting or that can pull your players into the city. So chapter 3 is called Fireball, and a fireball begins it off with a literal bang, and then this becomes sort of the investigative portion of the adventure, where they're piecing together clues, and so is the city guard. But if the players are savvy, they're always one step ahead, and they can pull in different pieces of knowledge and allies to help them gain information, or maybe give them access to someone with information. So there are a lot of different ways they probably could handle this. And as an investigation, I think it's fine. When I read through it, I thought, okay, I could see this running and playing out fine at the table. There were a couple points where I thought that there was a chance for a bottleneck in information. So if the players don't piece together some clue, or don't find a clue, or they don't go to a particular location, they might be out of luck. And you'll have to feed them that information through an NPC or some other device. The Alexandrian wrote an article on Dragon Heist. I'll link to it down in the description. And they were very critical of Dragon Heist and the investigative elements in particular, saying that there were various plot holes and things that the players couldn't rationally piece together. And I didn't necessarily get the same sense as I was reading through it. I wouldn't have been quite as harsh, but I think it points out that you need to be careful when crafting these, so that it does make intuitive sense, not just as you're reading it, but as you're describing it at the table, so that your players have a good chance of figuring things out on their own without you having to feed them the information. So I think probably for every group there are going to be a couple moments that lurch forward a little bit, unless you're careful about how you manage it and how you make ways to find the same information. And again, in part 2, we'll talk quite a bit more about how I would massage this section and how you could introduce some elements earlier on in the campaign, the players that could then leverage during the investigation to make it flow a little bit more smoothly. And then chapter 4 is once they discover the location, or the initial location of the Stone of Galore, and kind of who's behind it, or at least they're getting to the point where they're figuring out who's behind it, what villain is behind it. They are in a chase for this Stone of Galore, and depending on what villain you pick, the locations themselves will differ, but it's a madcap race for this Stone of Galore through all the different locations in rapid succession. And to me, when I read it, it feels a little bit like a Benny Hill chase sequence, and that's probably how I'd try to run it. But there is, I think, the possibility that it ends up a little bit railroaded, and I think you have to be careful of that. The way things are written in the book, it feels like sometimes the players could do something really well in this chase sequence, but then, oops, you pull something out of your hat and somebody else ends up with the Stone of Galore and they have to go to the next location. So it feels like it could end up being a little bit railroaded if you decide that you are definitely going to take it through the entire chase sequence. That said, it sounds like a lot of fun to run, and I think that there are plenty of ways that you can make it not as railroaded, so that you're giving your players choice or rewarding them if they do well in the chase sequence. And then chapters 5 through 8, as mentioned earlier, are the layers. And the layers, a lot of them I really like. They're really cool. There's a lot of good ideas. There's a lot of good rooms. The layouts are cool. They all feel quite different. So going into the Xanathar's lair is going to feel very different than going into the manor of the Casa Lanterns. The big issue here is if your players were successful early in the chase in chapter 4, they have the Stone of Galore, and they never need to go to the lair. So I alluded to this earlier when I said that chances are your players are only going to go to one of the 4 lairs, but there is a possibility they will visit none of them. And I actually think it's a very real possibility. If you have an inventive party, or they get lucky with rolls in chapter 4 and they end up with the Stone of Galore before the end of the chase sequence, unless you decide you want to make sure it gets to the end of the chase sequence, but that feels like taking agency away from the players a little bit, then you very well might not see these layers. That's a lot of material to put into a book that you're going to buy that your players might not ever run through. And I really love Waterdeep. I think I'm going to have a lot of fun running this. But man, I feel for that DM who wants to give their players a bunch of choice and they end up with the Stone of Galore and they've got this really cool lair and villain plan and they don't really get to use them. So again, I think that one of the most paramount concerns of this is finding ways to incorporate the villains into the setting that allow for other opportunities to end up in these layers. I want to use this material. I think it's very cool. I think there are 4 good chapters. I don't think there's a bad choice of villain, but it does scare me a little bit that I might not see this content, my players might not see this content, and they might feel a little bit cheated as a result. Chapter 9 is the Enchiridion, which is basically just a truncated version of some of the old manuals that they came out with on the city of Waterdeep that takes you through a lot of different locales and points of interest, and it talks about the standing statues of Waterdeep, which are these massive stone structures, and it also talks about various holidays that can happen throughout the year, and it gives you a lot of cool stuff to bring into the setting of Waterdeep, and I think it does a good job in this respect. It's not the most comprehensive manual that's come out for Waterdeep from D&D across multiple editions. I think the first was, back in second edition that Ed Greenwood wrote, and those go into a lot more detail, but I don't think you need all the detail that existed in some of the past editions for Waterdeep in order to make it come alive. So I think that even if you're brand new to the setting, this is going to give you plenty to work with, and it is a very useful chapter when you are making sure that you have an appropriate amount of depth and nuance to your setting. And then there are a few appendices. There are some magic items, and the magic items are cool, but there is an issue with them, and that's that most of them are magic items that the main villains have or other powerful NPCs, and your players are probably never going to end up with them, because if they go into direct confrontation with any of the villains, they're probably going to end up dead. This isn't that type of campaign. So you have to find ways to manipulate your way around that in ways that don't involve direct combat. So I was hoping for a few more magic items that maybe were located in places that weren't, say, on the person of Jarlaxle or Manchun, or these characters that your PCs are probably going to do their best to avoid. The monsters and NPCs index or appendix is very cool. I like that they stat out a lot of these villains. It's really nifty to see like Laeral Silverhand and Jarlaxle and Manchun. So having these stat blocks I think is great. I think that's going to be really cool for a lot of players and a lot of DMs in D&D regardless of what they think about Dragon Heist. So I think that is a nice addition. And there are a few useful handouts at the very end as well, and that takes us through the entirety of the book. So what do I think of it on the whole? I feel like probably this review portion of the video, it probably seems like it's more harsh on the book than I intended to be, because I read through this the first time and I was very excited to run it, and I think that there are a ton of cool ideas in it. I think that it's like many adventures from Wizards of the Coast that do have a really cool overarching structure and do have a lot of fun, wonderful ideas in them, but are going to require some prep work in order to make it flow smoothly at your table. Now, of course, they're creating these in a DM agnostic way, so everyone's going to have to do slightly different prep to make it their own, to make it work and run within their group, but I do feel like there are sections that could have been made a little bit easier to run, or as with Chapter 4, a little bit more open, so that it doesn't feel like you're having to funnel your players down one specific path. I'm not exactly sure how they might have been able to do this in a different way. They were definitely going for a different feel with this book, and in a lot of ways I think they're going to achieve that, because that chase sequence, that is the longest chase sequence that I've ever seen written out in a D&D or RPG book. If you end up running the full chase sequence, it's probably going to be the longest chase sequence that has ever existed at your table. So that's a brand new, unique experience. It's something that's very different from your traditional adventure. The fact that there are investigative elements, the fact that it is not necessarily an adventure about heroes rushing in and facing whatever foes and then coming out victorious. So this is an adventure that requires a lot of lateral thinking. It requires your players to leverage their information, their resources, their influence with different factions and allies in order to get what they want. There are a lot of things they're not going to be, even by the end when they're level 5, that they're not going to be able to defeat in combat. If they just go rushing in, they're going to end up dead. And I think there are a lot of ways that the book makes it easy to impart that information to your players, so they're never going to be in danger of not knowing that fact. And I think you have to keep that in mind, because if you are in a game and in a group who likes just beating the hell out of things, just going from one combat to the next, this probably isn't the adventure for you. But if you have some very creative, inventive players who don't mind having a bunch of social encounters that really do impact the bottom line, the major plot line of the campaign, and don't necessarily have to fight everything that they come into contact with who is against them, then you're probably going to have a real interesting, fun time. The players will probably surprise you, and they'll probably surprise me with some of their potential solutions to the problems presented in the book. So this isn't an adventure that I would necessarily recommend for newer players, because it is going to be very different from a traditional D&D experience. Maybe you're listening to me, or you read through the book and you say, you know what, this is perfect, my players don't want a ton of combat, and in that case, I would make an exception. I would say, okay, absolutely have this be one of the first that you run at the table. But if you have a group of newer players, they probably have a sense of what D&D is, and a lot of the other adventures that have come out are very much in that mold of a traditional heroic adventure. This one is somewhat different. You could end up with some very morally nebulous territory. You could end up with a conclusion that doesn't involve combat and doesn't involve clear winners and losers. You know, that there aren't too many adventures where I can say that. And I think that's very interesting. I think that makes this a unique book among any that exist in 5th edition, but I think it also means that it's not going to be right for every group. Then, of course, if you like running urban campaigns, there is no better example of a diverse, interesting place to set your campaign in the Forgotten Realms than Waterdeep. So there's so much to sink your teeth into, and if you really wanted to dig into the setting more than what exists in Dragon Heist, there are other supplements out there to allow you to do that, both ones that have been created by the community recently since the release of Dragon Heist, and dating back all the way, again, to the original things written about Waterdeep by Ed Greenwood way back in the day. So I think the biggest problem is the villain one, and I kind of wish that Wizards would have just picked the most interesting villain to them, and then had the others in the background and worked them more into the setting in ways that didn't have to do with the main plot, but gave you a lot more to work with. I think that it would have made for a longer, richer campaign without having to decide between good options, and again, there's no bad choices of villain in this, I think, but without having to decide between which content you want to run through, because it is going to be a shorter, quicker campaign, I think, for most groups than pretty much any other adventure, because it is only level 1 to 5, and you also aren't going to see all the content because of the villain choice that you're having to make. But outside of that, there is a lot to like here, and in part 2, that takes us through the review, and in part 2, we're going to talk about how I would run the game myself and how I'm planning to run the game, so that many of the issues, many of the problems that I talked about in that review are things that we can either gloss over or turn into strengths on occasion. Alright, that brings us to part 2 of this video, which is running the game, and I want to talk about how I would run the game. And let me start with choice of villain, because while I said that I like all the villains, and I do absolutely have a hierarchy of which ones I like best and least. So starting with the one I like the least, that would be the Xanathar. And I really like the Xanathar, and I really like the elements of the Xanathar that are already put into the campaign. So why is he my least favorite villain? Well, the reason he's my least favorite villain is because he is already sort of part of the campaign. In Chapter 1, the players are going to hear a lot about the Xanathar and the Xanathar Guild, so his minions and lackeys. Anyway, it doesn't matter who your villain is, the Xanathar is already part of this setting. And the other nice thing about that is both the Xanathar Guild and the Zentarim, who are kind of at odds and against each other as the campaign starts, are such a part of the setting already that there are a lot of plot hooks, whether it's faction stuff later on, or whether it's just through like hearing things around the city. There are a lot of plot hooks that can get you into things involving the Xanathar and the Xanathar Guild, even if he's not your villain. So there's actually a really way, there's a quest chain in one of the Chapter 2 faction chains where you could end up in the lair of the Xanathar, and he might not be your villain. And that's awesome, because I mentioned the big problem of there being the villain problem. You pick one villain, you're not going to see the other layers. You're not going to see this other content. And frankly, like Manshun, you can pull him into the campaign. There are a couple things that it alludes to where he's doing things behind the scenes. But if you don't pick Manshun as your villain, your players probably won't even know he exists unless you really shoehorn him in there somehow. But they're going to know the Xanathar exists already. So I would pick any of the other villains and then work the Xanathar in as much as I can. So it's a great red herring. If they encounter the Xanathar's minions and his sub-layer in Chapter 1, a lot of them might say, aha, the Xanathar is our villain, we have figured it out, and of course they'll be wrong. And I think there are the easiest and most obvious hooks into his lair and content involving him. And I do think it's very interesting. So if I get a chance to send my players to 2 of the lairs for very different reasons, but reasons that still make sense in the campaign, I'm absolutely going to take that. Or I'm absolutely going to give them the opportunity to do that. And this is what I was talking about when I said I wish they had just picked one villain and had the others very involved, but not as the main villain. If they did what they did with the Xanathar with, say, 2 of the others, and then just had one of them as the main villain, I think this would be a much easier book to run as a whole. So after Xanathar, the other villain that I don't think I would pick is Manshun. Now, again, I actually like a lot about Manshun's lair. I like a lot about him as a villain. The reason I don't think I'd pick him over the other 2 is that he is the most obviously villainous of the 4. And it's not so much that I dislike Manshun, but I really like the other 2 because the other 2 offer more of a conundrum in their goals and motivations. They're going to offer more of a problem for the players if they really discover the motivations and the reasons that Jarlaxle and the Castellanters want the Dragon Horde. So if you want the most classic villain that the players are almost unequivocally going to be against and they're going to try to stop from getting the gold altogether, Manshun's a good choice. He's not the one I would choose, though, because I think there is more nuance to the other 2, Jarlaxle and the Castellanters. Jarlaxle I'm not as surprised about. I went into this adventure knowing a lot about him from the Drizzt novels and from some of the other canon that's out there for Wizards of the Coast, and I expected to like him as a villain. I expected to like the Xanathar as my other villain. I didn't really know anything about the Castellanters, so I didn't expect to like them. So I was really surprised by their story and how much I thought it made for really interesting narrative. And the point behind these 2 is that if the players get to know their motivations, the reason that they want the gold, it's actually somewhat sympathetic. Now, in Jarlaxle's case, he's not an overtly villainous person. And so he's the one that maybe you'll end up working with as a player, as a party. So I could see a situation where it ends up as some sort of split, where he ends up with some, the players end up with some, etc. I think it's most likely to happen with him. It's certainly not a certainty. There are different ways it could play out, even with Jarlaxle as the villain, but that is one more avenue that it could take, and that is something that Jarlaxle could use to try to manipulate the party. So as a villain, I think he's more fun to play than, say, a Manshun, which you would play as more of a straight villain. And the Castellanters, don't get me wrong, they're very, very evil, but their reason for wanting the gold is somewhat sympathetic because they made a bargain with the Devil of Devils, and now they need to give him a certain sacrifice that involves a lot of gold, and they need this dragon horde for it in order to save the lives of their young children. Now, this could be a point of pain for a lot of parties, and the Castellanters might use this as leverage to try to get the party to work with them. Now, there are other nefarious things going on, and the players don't necessarily know that, and the Castellanters won't necessarily share that, which adds another level of intrigue. And this is why I think that theirs is possibly the darkest, but also most interesting narrative and interesting villain because of the different possibilities, because of the different ways it creates that intrigue and different layers to what's going on. So I would definitely choose between one of those 2. Again, I think you're going to be fine if you choose either Manshun or the Xanathar, but for reasons stated, I think they're not my favorites. So in Chapter 1, they're learning a lot about the setting. They are probably making an ally in Renaer Neverember, and I think this is all fine. I think it's good. There are a couple things I would tweak, one of which is they get some of the information about the ongoing conflict between the Zhentarim and the Xanathar Guild, and this is over the Stone of Galore, the big MacGuffin that the players will end up having to chase after. And you get some information, but not all of it there in Chapter 1. And frankly, I would just front load a lot of this information. I would give them the full exposition of what this is and why it exists and why the different factions are after it, so they know exactly what they're looking for from the start. I wouldn't parse it out over multiple chapters or NPCs or plot hooks or whatever. And I think that is the easiest way to make sure they understand, okay, here's the quest. There will be other things to do in Waterdeep, but this is the plot. One of the other things that I would do in Chapter 1, and I think this is really neat, it's a risk-reward play for the players, is they end up in a sub-layer of the Xanathar's minions, and they're asked to, it's a rescue mission. And they get in there, and it's basically going to be like combat and stealth and trying to get out with this person intact. And if you run it that way, that's great. I would leave the option open for them to enter the sublayer and have these Xanathar's minions mistake them for, say, new recruits to the Xanathar guild. And in the Xanathar's sublayer here, I would say, all right, if they go along with that bluff, then I would have someone take them to a particular room and then maybe say, all right, well, if you're members, we'll talk you through some stuff, we'll give you some gold, and we have to put the tattoo on you. And so the players have to decide whether they want to get tattooed with the Xanathar symbol. So you can see how this could pay dividends later on, and you could probably also see why it could be problematic for them later on if different factions or NPCs who are essentially good aligned find out that they are members of the Xanathar guild, whether or not they are actually working for the Xanathar, then they are probably going to turn against the players. But it also gives them an in if they want to infiltrate the Xanathar guild, get information about the Xanathar, get into his lair, etc., etc. So whether or not the Xanathar is your main villain, I think this is a very interesting risk-reward possibility for the players. And if they want to just fight their way through it, that's fine too. Or if they don't want to get tattoos at all, I would certainly understand that, because I'm sure the players will see the risk-reward as soon as it's offered to them as well. But I think this would be a quick, easy, fun way to add a little intrigue and give your players more options in the later chapters. So chapter 2, they're in Trollskull Manor. There are a couple, there's actually a lot that I would change up in this section, but I actually think that the fact that this chapter exists is really cool, because the idea of it, the idea that this is a whole chapter to get to know these factions and your manor and the city, is really great. So this is the chapter where you're going to make Waterdeep come alive, I think more so than any. And the first way that I would do that, it's a throwaway line either at the end of chapter 1 or the beginning of chapter 2, but Volo, the one who gives them the deed to the manor, says, and let me know if you want me to show you around the city. I know all the stops, I'll be happy to. And I would very much make sure that they know that this is an important invitation to be shown around the city by Volo, because this is your opportunity to actually show them the sights and actually show them the different points of interest within the city. And it's your chance to, among points of interest that might not have anything to do with the plot, also include locations and NPCs and temples and whatever else that will show up later on, or that the players will need to know about in, say, chapter 3 during the investigative sequence. So if they decline Volo the first time, I would actually repeat the offer to them. I would give them a second chance to do this, because I think this is your chance to pull in all the information from the Enchiridion in chapter 9, and it's your chance to put in a lot of this information they're going to need to know in chapters 3, possibly 4 and 5, but in a way that's going to seem organic, in a way that's going to let them figure out the investigative sequence later on. So you don't have to feed them that information through an NPC at the exact right time. You give it to them earlier and then let them figure it out on their own. That's going to be way more satisfying to the players than if you have to deliver the information in chapter 3. The next thing is I would not hesitate to mix and match the different quest chains for the factions, as long as they make sense with that faction. So if there are a series of quests or plot hooks that I really like and they decide they want to ally with a different faction, as long as it's the same alignment, I'd probably just get rid of the quests I don't like and insert others so that I could make it more interesting for them. I think that this is your opportunity to get them into the Xanathar's hideout if that is something that you want to offer up to them. They may end up allying with more than one faction, and this is fine too. And again, mixing and matching, I think no problem whatsoever, because they're not going to know unless you tell them. There are a couple small problems I think I'd try to find a way around. I think that when they start chapter 2, there's a lot of money they have to put up front in order to get a bunch of stuff done in the manor, and I'm not sure they have that money. I'm not sure they have much money at the start of chapter 2, and there isn't a whole lot of way to get that much money until later in the campaign. But at that point, the main plot, the main narrative is going with such a fever pitch that you might not ever get to come back to this material in chapter 2. So with as much time as I think I'd like to spend in chapter 2, I'd probably bump them up a level at some point, and I'd also find some way for them to get enough money early on in chapter 2 so they can do some things with it then. They don't have to wait until they're level 3, 4, 5 and they're into these other chapters that are going to take up their attention. And with the different plot hooks and quest chains that you can have in chapter 2 with Trollskull, Alley, and the different factions, one of the things that I might consider is pulling in an entire quest, an entire module. So this is where the modules that are on DM's Guild specifically for Waterdeep and Waterdeep Dragon Heist might come in handy. And I don't know for a fact that I will need them, but I've got a couple waiting in the wings in case I do, in case there's the right time for them. So ones that I think were interesting when I read through them and I thought, okay, this could be fun. And I would tie those to a faction. So I would probably change some of the details of the module to make it fit with whatever faction it is that they decide to ally with. Or you don't necessarily have to stick strictly to the faction system. You could just have a benefactor. You could have Mert the moneylender say, these are some new adventurers and they helped out Volo. You know, why don't you go do this for me? I'm too busy to do it myself. And then you have a wealthy, noble, influential figure who is your friend and you've done something for, and you've given them an interesting adventure to do on the side. And yes, Mert is tied to some of the factions, but you don't necessarily need it to be a faction quest. So again, because I'd want to spend more time in this chapter before the fireball sequence that begins a lot of the other action that's going to happen in Dragon Heist, I would probably level them up in the middle of it somewhere rather than using the leveling system that they suggest. So once the fireball sequence does start, hopefully they have a good amount of allies or influence or information about the city, and they're able to make their way on their own without too much help from you, the DM, or NPCs that you give to them. But I would keep an eye out for the different pieces of information that are delivered in this chapter, and if it seems like there's only one way to find out this piece of information, I would make sure there's at least one more. And that's how I would avoid the bottleneck that I talked about, and this is how I think you can avoid some of the inconsistencies that may exist depending on how your party tackles this investigation. That's really all I have to say about Chapter 3. Otherwise, I think there are plenty of good sequences in here. I don't think it's a chapter that's in need of too much of an overhaul or too much added to it. I think it's more tweaking at the edges so that you make sure it flows smoothly. I think the worst thing that could happen here is your players get stuck and you end up having to hand them the next plot item to get them to the next location. Chapter 4 is the big chase sequence where they are after the Stone of Galore, and I mentioned that when you read it, it sounds like a frantic Benny Hill chase sequence, and that is exactly how I would run it. I would run this as breathlessly as possible. I would try to get through all of this material in less than one session, not because I don't think it could be stretched out to more than that, but because I want to create that sense of frantic, just a frenzy of activity and movement and chasing. So I really want it to feel like the longest chase sequence that they will ever play through. And we mentioned the potential railroading problem in this one, where they do something really good in a particular location, and then you say, whoops, no, now this person has the stone, you gotta go here and find them. And you could keep doing that over and over again. And I feel like this could get a little redundant, and it could get a little frustrating for your players. So I would make sure that I built into this chase sequence some opportunities for them to just end it before you get to the final location or the final several locations. And if they are lucky enough with dice rolls, or they are tactical enough with their strategy and how they go about doing this, then I would reward the players and I would have them end up with the Stone of Galore earlier than the end of this sequence. And sometimes by the end of the sequence, they don't end up with the Stone of Galore, and it ends up with whatever villain you've chosen. Unfortunately, this does leave the fear that you won't see the villain's lair, and there are some ways that they could be successful in the chase sequence and still not end up with the stone. Say if the city guard comes and confiscates it, and then somehow the villain finds a way to get it from the city guard, you could do something like that. But again, that feels a little bit like you're not rewarding the players for their good play. I'm really not sure how I'm going to handle this just yet. I think I'm probably going to end up doing it on the fly, and whatever feels right at the table at the time, that's what I'll do. But I'm going to be crossing my fingers that something happens that allows me to justifiably say, oops, it's gone, and it ends up in the villain layer, so they have to go get it from there. But if that doesn't present itself, I'm not going to force it. And I think that's one of maybe my biggest fear about running this. And I want to be true to my players about how I DM. I want to stay true to how I want to run the game, which means that this possibility has to be open, that we won't see chapters 5 through 8. So if the Stone of Galore does end up in the villain's lair, then this actually, more so than the getting of the gold, is probably going to be the heist sequence. And there are a lot of different ways it could play out. I think it'll be a lot of fun for your players. I think it'll be a lot of fun for you. And I would more react to how they approach it. You know, who do they pull in? What allies do they tell, or don't they tell their allies? Do they just try to stealth in on their own? Do they alert the city guard? Do they not? Do they end up in direct conflict with the villain? Do they run away at that point? Do they try to strike a deal? What happens there? Um, Lots of different ways it could play out. And one thing we didn't talk about in the review portion of this video that I really enjoy is the Vault of Dragons itself, where the money is kept once they find out where it is. And one of the most interesting things to me about it is that there are 3 keys, and you need each of these 3 keys in order to get into the vault. And you're going to roll randomly. You're going to roll 3d6, and each one will map to one of the keys. So there's 18 possible keys and many different combinations that could occur. And there are things like unicorn. Like a unicorn is one of the keys. But the thing that I like about it, the thing that I think is really fun, is that it doesn't have to be a literal unicorn. And if your players figure this out, it allows for a lot of creativity. So for example, if they find a plush unicorn or a unicorn figurine, you could conceivably say, yes, that counts, and have that be the key. Or they might not figure that out, or they might not be able to find a unicorn figurine, and they might actually have to figure out how in the world they're going to get a real unicorn down into this vault. So I think it's worth looking through these lists of 18 things, because you can seed them into your campaign in earlier chapters in ways that seem like they're just description. And if your players are observant, if they're listening, then it will allow them the chance to piece that together and say, oh my God, we heard about a unicorn figurine in this one shop earlier in the campaign. I wonder if it's still there. And that was you putting that there in case you rolled the unicorn, so that they could, if they were being observant, put that together later on and feel very clever. Maybe your players aren't this clever and that doesn't happen, and that's okay too. But I think this is a really cool opportunity to put a lot of little elements into your campaign that are seemingly arbitrary or seemingly just description, but then later on could have a big impact. I also think it'd be fine if you were to roll these at the beginning of the campaign, well before they got to the vault, so that you knew what the keys would be, so you could deliberately have something available, maybe not for all 3, but for 1 or 2 of them you could include into the campaign, because you're not going to know, unless if you're rolling when they get to the vault, you're not going to know which 3 they are. So you could put 6 different ones into your campaign, and then maybe none of them end up as the keys that your players need. So I would consider doing that as well. One of the other interesting things, and one of the ways that I think you could, again, get them into the Xanathar's lair without the Xanathar being the main villain, is that one of the keys is a Beholder eye stalk. Now, again, say they figured out a different way to get around this, and it's not literally a Beholder eye stalk, or maybe it is, but it's from a dead Xanathar and not the Xanathar. But maybe your players don't come up with these solutions, and they say, oh my God, we have to go to the Xanathar's lair to get this key to the vault. So that then becomes a really fun, interesting, scary side quest for them. I am tempted, very tempted, to actually change these keys to other things that could lead to the other villain layers. I don't know. That feels like I'm almost railroading in order to see the content, but I do think it'd be more fun. And again, maybe they don't end up going to the villain lair. You know, there are other ways you can get that Beholder eye stalk, even in the book. Like, you don't even have to put it in. Like, there are other ways in the book to get a Beholder eye stalk that it doesn't involve going to the Xanathar's lair at all. So it wouldn't necessarily railroad them into the layers this way. But man, when I saw that eye stalk, I just smiled devilishly. And I think as long as you gave them another out, if they were clever, that I'd be okay changing these keys so that one of the options to get the key would be, oh man, we gotta go steal this from Jarlaxle, or something like that. I think that would be insane. I think the fear that would come over the players and like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna pull this off, would be really fun. Or, you know, again, they could be really clever and come up with a different alternative that doesn't involve that, and they're probably gonna feel pretty good about themselves too, and that's gonna be a satisfying conclusion to entering the vault. Another fun way that you could put this into your campaign without going so far as the villain layers is, I mentioned incorporating modules or longer quests, or turning the small quest blurbs into full quests in Chapter 2. So what if the reward for one of these involved something that became a key to the vault later on?
Your players might not think anything of it at the time, but they might say, oh my goodness, we got a bronze dragon scale, look at that, now we can use it as a key. Or maybe there's a bounty or some quest that's out there that isn't for a faction that's made available and they know about in this city, and they hear about the reward and they think to themselves, well, why would I do this? Or it's not for a faction, so we don't want to do it, and they let it go. But then they come back and they need this bronze dragon scale, and they say, oh my goodness, we could have gotten this bronze dragon scale. So they're going to go back and figure out who was offering up that reward and what the quest was for and if it's still available. So this is a way that you could have them go back into the city and start interacting with people who maybe they talked to before, whether or not they took all these quest hooks. So yeah, I have to think long and hard about these keys because I think there are just too many cool possibilities with them in order to not do something fun with them, to not make it some part of your larger campaign. And there are elements of the adventure that I didn't talk about here, and those are probably the places where I wouldn't change much. So most of what I talked about here are the ways that I would alter the adventure a little bit to really make it my own, to morph it into something that I think my players would really enjoy, I would really enjoy, and that would have a lot of meaningful choices. Anything else that I didn't mention, I'm probably pretty okay with. But if you're about to run this and you are looking for ideas or inspiration, I hope some of what I mentioned helped. I think that bouncing ideas off other players or other DMs can be really cool. And I think there are a lot of ways that you can take interesting ideas like the ones presented in Dragon Heist and turn them into something that can be really, really deep and really interesting and transcendent for your players depending on how it plays out. Still with me? Okay, we are now on to part 3. I think these last 2 sections are going to be a little bit shorter, but I want to do justice to this adventure, so let's dig in. Part 3 is about Waterdeep itself and bringing the setting to life, bringing the city to life. And I think it makes it easy because there is so much going on. So let's talk about it. I'd start by reading the Enchiridion in Chapter 9 to familiarize yourself with the city. And I think that more so than even some of the old editions of materials on Waterdeep, it digs into a lot of certainly the statues, the standing statues, but the holidays as well. It goes into a lot of depth about the different holidays. And I would try to incorporate those in ways, even if it's just flavor, to talk about what the city is celebrating and why, to add a little bit of flavor to your city life throughout the campaign. So whatever season, whatever villain you choose, that chooses the season that you're in. And you have at least 3 or 4, I think it might be as much as like half a dozen in each of these seasons, where you can talk about what's going on and you can make it seem like it's a city that's alive, that is celebrating things that are outside of whatever it is the players are doing. If you really, really, really want to dig deep into Waterdeep, there is something called Volo's Guide to Waterdeep back from 2nd edition. There's also one that I think is just called Waterdeep in 4th edition. Both of those are much longer, go into much more depth, and you don't need the information from that, but there is a ton of cool information from those. And I think it's still applicable. You could read that 2nd edition manual and 98% of it is still going to be applicable to a 5th edition Waterdeep. There are also a lot of maps for Waterdeep. I have a gigantic one that I'm going to be using, again, back from 2nd edition, but it's still valid. The outlay of the city is still pretty similar, if not close to identical. And the book does come with a map, and I think that can work really well. But if you have others, either for individual sections of the city or the city itself, I think your players will probably end up using them. So because of the size of the city and everything that's going on with it, it's easy to start to think strategically about where you want to go and how you want to handle things. So I like providing detailed maps for players to see how they use them. Oftentimes I find they do use them, and there is certainly no lack of maps for Waterdeep that you can provide for your players. So what would I do to bring the city alive? I mentioned the holidays and festivals and things of that nature. We talked in a previous video, it was the Groundhog Day and world building video, and I used some examples specifically from Waterdeep in a former campaign that I ran, and it really just talked about pulling in some details that don't necessarily have anything to do with the plot, but are just enough that it seems like there's much more going on beneath the surface of your world. That was the gist of the video. And I think it's easy to do in Waterdeep because there's so much to pull from. So what I would do is I would, either in the Enchiridion or anything else you can find online or in other manuals, go through the wards of Waterdeep. These are the large neighborhoods, and each of them has its own distinctive personality. And I would find 2 or 3 points of interest in each of these wards. So then, either when you're talking to your players about the city, or maybe when Volo is showing them around in game, you can talk about these things and you can give a little bit of the historical detail about this point of interest. And again, it might not have anything to do with your plot, but you're not doing this for 100 different locations, because that would be too much. There is too much in Waterdeep for any one DM to bring to life. It's just impossible. But if you pick 2 or 3 in the different sections, and then you pick, 5 or 6 different sections, you're going to have some interesting elements that then they could then go to or make as a rendezvous point, or that you could just describe, and it is going to make it seem like the city has some interesting things going on that aren't plot related. And I think that's important to make the world seem alive, to give it some depth, to make it seem like there is more going on beneath the surface, because in Waterdeep there always should be. I think there's also an opportunity with this, with the materials in Chapter 2. Can you tell I really love that Chapter 2 and I want to do a lot with it? You probably can. And so I think one of the things that I would try to do in Chapter 2 is, say Volo gives them that tour. Well then, they have these quest chains for the factions, or they're running around the city doing different things and meeting allies and going to shops and stuff like that. I would try to, if they're doing a quest, I would try to work in the locations that I've picked, or maybe the locations, the points of interest that I picked to have a lot of historical information about are the ones that the players are likely to end up in as part of these quest chains, so that there is a connection to what they're doing in Dragon Heist. So for example, it doesn't explicitly state that any of the quests, any of the plot hooks, go to the Field of Triumph. This is the gladiatorial arena in Waterdeep. It doesn't specifically state that any of them go there or take place there, but I might find a way to describe that as they're walking around the city, and then find a reason for the players to go there so that they're doing something plot related. And I would also use this as an excuse to bring out the villains more, either the main villain that you've chosen or any of the others. So again, I think one of the easiest ones to do this with is the Xanathar, and if your players go to the seedier elements of the city, the areas that are a little more downtrodden, a little more economically deprived, you might see some evidence of crime and, say, some of the Xanathar guild graffiti, for example. The other one that I think is really easy to draw in is Jarlaxle, and the reason being is that the book gives you his cover for being in the city is a parade, is this giant parade. So during one of these holidays or festivals, or during something else that the players are doing, I would absolutely have Jarlaxle's parade, just going around the city, making a bunch of noise and being loud and colorful and ridiculous. And I don't even care if Jarlaxle is my villain or not. At some point, the parade's just going to be going around having a grand old time. And if the players decide to investigate, or if they hear rumors that this is Jarlaxle's parade, I'd probably give them something to find if they decide, let's look into this a little bit. I would have a minor plot hook embedded in a rumor. So if they don't follow it, fine. It's just a parade that makes the city seem more alive, but it will also give them something to investigate if they decide that they're curious. And for one of the major feasts or festivals, I might also have the Castellanters host a ball. And you could have this with any noble, any dignitary, any large figure in Waterdeep, but I'd probably pick the Castellanters, because why the heck not? And again, this doesn't matter if they're the villain that you chose or not. It might be another excuse to create a red herring, like, oh, are the Castellanters the villain? Because your players, even if they haven't read the book, probably know the 4 different villains that you have to choose from. So there are a couple individual quests, for example, in the ideas it gives you for faction quests, where you end up at some banquet or feast or the noble villa of one of the noble families of Waterdeep. So why not the Castellanters? And if they've heard a rumor that the Castellanters are after the Stone of Galore, when they're at this feast, this banquet, do they search around a little bit? Do they push their luck in trying to figure out? And you already have the lair, so this is an excuse to get them into the Castellanters' lair. Oh my gosh, I just figured this out. This is me like talking through possibilities in the video. I didn't plan this out beforehand. I just had the light bulb moment of, oh, holy crap, I could get them into the Castellanters' villa this way, and so they could see this lair. This is amazing. I am getting ideas just by doing this video and this channel. Start a YouTube channel if you want good ideas. Totally recommend it. So hopefully that's enough specific examples to give you some ideas to take it and run on your own with it. I'm sure there are other good ones you could come up with, and reading through the Enchiridion, you're probably going to think of half a dozen that I'm not thinking of right now that are going to work really great and you're going to be really excited to run. So if you come up with 3 or 4 of these ideas and then they only end up at say 1 or 2, I still think that's a success. And if you end up getting to describe a lot of these different locations and your players are like, wow, look at all this stuff our DM prepared about Waterdeep, this is amazing, they're going to think you're really cool. And you know what? You are. All right, let's stop talking a while. All right, then, let's stop talking about Waterdeep and bringing it to life. I think that should give you plenty of ideas, and I think I'm all tapped out on specific ideas myself. But I do want to talk about supplements and materials to pull into your game and why you may or may not want to do that. So let's get to it. So this is the 4th and final part of the video, and again, initially I was going to purchase a bunch, and I did purchase a bunch of supplements and additional materials for Dragon Heist that the community created, and I was going to go through them individually, and that would have made this video probably 2 hours longer than it already is. But it was an instructive process, and it made me reevaluate why I do and don't want to pull certain additional supplements into established adventures, and in a similar way, why I do and don't want to pull things in that others have created into my homebrew adventures. I think a lot of the philosophy behind it is pretty similar. So first off, what's out there? What has been created? Well, I found a lot in a few different categories. And the first is there are a lot of adventure modules that you can just run in Waterdeep or find ways to work into the adventure. And your mileage may vary with this. There may be things that you want to do. Like I said earlier, I have a couple waiting in the wings in case it makes sense to throw them into those Chapter 2 faction quests that I think could be interesting, that I think could be a larger adventure than some of the blurbs that they give you. And I think that's a good way to use it, but there's obviously too many. I wouldn't pull in too many. I would stick to what's in Dragon Heist for the most part. Because that, more than anything, is the thing that I realized as I'm looking at all these supplements. I thought, okay, a lot of these are great. They're going to enhance the game, and you can't put everything in an adventure book that you might ever want. So Wizards has to make some decisions. But at the same time, I think that an adventure should be runnable all by itself, and it shouldn't need anything else to feel complete. And fortunately, I do think Dragon Heist feels complete. I don't think it needs anything. There are some that I'm probably going to incorporate into my game, but I'm going to limit that because I don't want it to bloat to something that it shouldn't be. So the next thing that I saw a lot of was new and varied and deeper, more complex options for Troll Skull Manor. And this involved like the daily upkeep or like minor little quests that might only take you like 10 or 15 minutes at the table to play through, of things that you could do toward your tavern and building it up as a business, and different options for like the menu and the drinks and the entertainment. And if you really want to get into the nesting element of this and have your players build out a home, maybe building out a base for multiple sessions seems really interesting to you. I'll be perfectly honest, it doesn't to me. So I think there's already plenty on this in the book, like the different guilds that you're working with and the different things you can do with your tavern. I think there's plenty in Dragon Heist. So I looked at a few of these, and many of them are well written. So if you're interested in expanding that, if you want to have a full base building sequence, I think that there are some cool things out there for you, but it isn't something that I will need. And the other one that I saw a lot of was new factions. And again, I think there are plenty of factions to play with in your game already. There are a bunch to choose from that might be trying to catch the eye of the party, or that the party might be interested in joining, or figuring out if they want to join, that sort of thing. And so they're not all mutually exclusive, so you could probably have them join up with a couple different factions. I think that would be perfectly acceptable. And this isn't something where I feel like I need more options, but again, if you do, there's some cool ones out there. The last thing I'm going to talk about is some of the smaller additions and supplements that I do think I'm going to incorporate into my game. But before I get to that, in these major categories of modules and supplements and materials for the adventure, as I was looking through all of them and the vast variety of choices that I had, it did sort of dawn on me that probably the best way to handle this when you're reading through not just Dragon Heist but any adventure is to read through it once, maybe twice, figure out how you want to run it, and then ask yourself, what do I need more of? What would I like to see more of in here? Or what, if I'm going to be running this tomorrow, do I think I'm going to flesh out considerably more than what's in the book? So before you look at what's out there, before you look at what the community has created at all, you ask yourself that question. You say, what is it that I need in order to make this mine? So I would ask and answer that question first, and then I would go to DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG or some of these others and see if those things have already been created, because it's probably going to save you a lot of work if you're looking for something very particular and it already exists. And you say, awesome, I'm going to pay $2 to $5, download it, include it in my game, perfect, work's done. But if you go in the opposite way and you say, okay, what's out there? Oh, that looks neat, that looks neat, that looks neat. You're going to end up with a lot of stuff, and it's not necessarily going to enhance the adventure. It's not going to enhance the campaign all the time. You might just be adding things that you don't need more of, because there might already be enough of that thing in the adventure, at least the way that you are going to run it. So outside of having a couple modules that I liked waiting in the wings in case I need to pull them in, I'm not sure whether or not I will. We'll see. The only other things that I think I will actually use when I run Dragon Heist are very small things that just add a little bit of flavor to the game in ways that I think bring the setting alive a little bit more. So for example, there I think are no less than 3 different versions of a downloadable printable deed to Trollskull Manor. Now, do you need this? Absolutely not. But if you hand your players the deed to Trollskull Manor and you wrap it up and it looks all official and Volothamp Gadarm's signature is at the bottom, they're probably going to enjoy it. They're probably going to smile and say, haha, we have a deed to a manor in Waterdeep. So it can make it feel like they have ownership of it. So I think that's cool. Again, nothing that you need, but just small stuff here and there that's going to add flavor. This isn't, it's not going to add anything to the session length. This isn't a quest hook, but something fun, something small. One of the others that I really like has a number of different newspapers for Waterdeep, and it has like 3 or 4 issues of each of these different newspapers, and the newspapers run the gamut from like a gossip rag that just has nothing substantial in it, all the way up to their equivalent of like the Wall Street Journal, where they're talking very in depth about the day's news and the trends in the Forgotten Realms and the Sword Coast. And it's the front pages, it's the cover pages of 3 or 4 different magazines, and there's 3 or 4 different issues of each of these magazines or newspapers, I guess. So some I think have magazine covers, some have newspaper covers, and I would offer the players, I would have someone come by and say, hey, do you want subscriptions to such and such magazines? And I would describe them briefly through this NPC and give the players the option to actually subscribe to these and have them show up at the doorstep of Trollskull Manor. And then when they arrive, every other session or so, perhaps, I would actually print this out and give them the copy of that newspaper's front page so that they could read through it. Now, this may be nothing more than some nice flavor text for them to read through and laugh at or whatever. And if that's all it is, great. I think it's a nice way to add some flavor to your game. And I think that the newspapers were done really well. There was some nice art on them. It felt like they were different publications. If you wanted to get really creative, you could take some of the things that are in these headlines or in these newspapers or on the magazine covers, and you could turn it into legitimate rumors or legitimate quest chains within Waterdeep. So, is this thing going on in the world right now and they're talking about it in the newspaper? Well, here's a plot hook related to it. So they might read it, and then the next session there's a plot hook related to it, and they say, oh my god, we just read about this. So that could be really cool. I haven't thought of specific ways to do that, but that's something that I might try to do if I can think of some good ways to incorporate it. And there's one other that I'm pretty sure I'm going to use once they have Trollskull Manor, and it got fairly popular on the DM's Guild. And with all of these, if I think about it, I'll link it down. I'll link them all down in the description that I'm using. But it's just job boards or quest boards. So when you walk into the tavern, you look up and you see like the bounties, and that's what this is. So it's a number of different like quest boards that you could have hanging in your tavern. So maybe I put it up and maybe the players look at it and use that for quest hooks, or maybe they hang it up and other adventurers come into their tavern and look at the quest board and use it. So maybe they befriend some other adventurers who are trying to make a name for themselves. I don't know. And the other thing that I liked about it was that it included some blank templates. So if you really wanted to put some quest hooks that weren't random or arbitrary or were things that you wanted them specifically to be interested in or to hear about, you could take these blank templates for the job boards and you could write in whatever it is that you want. So that's something that I could see myself using, not just in Dragon Heist, but in multiple campaigns. So there was an appeal to it in that sense.
So there is one other resource that I want to direct you toward, and it's not on DM's Guild, and it's nothing that you have to pay for. It's actually a blog, and the blog is PowerScore RPG. I'll link to it down in the description with a lot of other things that I've been talking about. But in one of his posts, I don't actually know the name of the guy who runs the blog, but it's a really cool blog. It has a lot of good information. I like going there on occasion to read the different things that he puts up about various adventures. And one of the things that he did for Dragon Heist is he created sort of a Cliff's Notes for the entire book. Now, when I run adventures, usually I have something very similar to that, a Cliff's Notes that act as my session notes, and it'll be sort of a bulleted list of things that I'm pulling from the book and other things that I want to remember or add in at certain points, and it's basically designed so that I don't have to refer back to the book terribly often during play. And so I read through this blog post, and I was in awe of just how logically it was laid out and how thorough it was, pulling in relevant details from the plot of Dragon Heist. And I said, wow, this is basically what I would try to do with my session notes. So I think probably what I'm going to do whenever I do run this is just Control-C, Control-V into a Word document and then chop it up as needed and maybe tweak some things depending on what I'm changing in the setting and in the adventure, and then just use that as my session notes. So I know I'm going to be forgetting a number of supplements or modules or other things that you could pull into your game, and in between the time when I record this and when it goes live, when you're watching this, there will undoubtedly have been more things that have come out. And there's just too much to really look at all of it. That's both a blessing and a curse, because oftentimes you can be overwhelmed with the different materials, but you never have a lack of options. But I think that's also why it's very important to look at the adventure first and then see if there is anything that you need or that you want, and then go looking for it, rather than looking first and then figuring out whether or not it works in your game. And that is all I have on Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So I hope you learned quite a bit on the adventure, how you might want to run it, some cool ideas for that, Waterdeep itself, the different supplements that are out there to help you enhance your game. If you got ideas on none of those things, congratulations for watching to the end anyway. And this was really fun for me to make. I am really excited to run this. I might be a little bit biased because I love Waterdeep as a setting and as a city so much, but I don't think that's a bad thing. When you're passionate about a setting, that is where I think you need to lean into it, because that's where you need to find excuses to run there, because your passion is going to come through in how you run the game and how much work you put into it and how much you try to make it exciting and interesting for your players. Oh, and the other thing that you can put down in the comments is whether or not this video was useful to you. I really haven't planned out many videos that are anywhere near the length of this one. This is the longest one that I have planned out for quite some time, but I really enjoyed putting it together and doing a deeper dive into an adventure, something that was a little bit beyond, say, a surface level review after a quick read through. And it really caused me to think about how I would run it, and I think it was really useful to me to do that. And so I really enjoyed putting the video together, and if it was useful to you, if it was beneficial to you, let me know, because while I'm not going to go out of my way to make really long videos if there isn't a use for it for the audience, if there is, I won't mind doing deeper dives into other adventures, either ones from the past in 5th edition or ones as they come out into the future. So let me know if you disagree with anything that I said. Let me know if you agree with things that I said. Let me know if my advice on running the adventure helped you. I would love to hear that. That would just make my day. And regardless, thanks for watching. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. It means a ton to me, and I will see you in the next video.